We continue with our discussion and attempt to derive Cauchy's equation using Gauss's divergence theorem that connects the volume integral and the surface integral. So in the equations that we were discussing, if we replace Gij in the extended divergence theorem, the same divergence theorem that I am talking about, the Gauss's divergence theorem, and we replace it with the quantity rho v into v, which is a second order tensor, the last term in the equation in which we equate all the forces with the mass into acceleration, the momentum forces. If we replace that, then we obtain this term, and it is to be noted that this quantity v into v, the product of two vectors, it is known as the outer product of the velocity vector with itself. Remember, it is not inner product or the dot product or even the cross product. It's a different quantity altogether, in fact, tensor quantity, and therefore we replace this when we replace in these equations, again using the divergence theorem, then we put together all these integral quantities in the equation to obtain this equation. That is, all the forces, the body forces, the surface forces, when they are equated to momentum forces, and then in that equation we use Gauss's divergence theorem to convert it, to bring our equation into this form. It reduces to this form and it becomes a kind of a volume integral. In this volume integral, so this quantity is equal to 0. And this can, since this is a generalized result, this is only possible if the integrand itself is also 0. And if the integrand is 0, then this equation is reduced to the integral delta by d by dt into rho of the vector v, the velocity, plus divergence of rho into v is equal to rho g plus divergence of sigma ij. Sigma, remember, is the stress vector and the quantity, and it has 9 components, as I mentioned. The French mathematician, whose name was Augustin Louis de Cauchy, he first of all arrived at this result, and therefore after his name this equation is reduced to this form. This plays an important role in the derivation of Navier-Stokes equation and in derivation of momentum equation, and therefore it's so important. And it so happens that we can arrive at this result in many ways. This result that we have obtained is by using Gauss's divergence theorem, in which surface and volume integrals are related and help us to generate this equation. The same equation we can determine by using one or two other methods also, and we look at those methods in our discussion. So these are the same equations written in a summarized manner. I have already explained their significance, each of them, but it is good to write them put together at a place. Finally, the Cauchy's equation in its familiar form, in its standard form, is written as this. It's a differential form of equation, and it reflects the linear momentum, and it applies to any type of fluid motion, and in which extensive use of the divergence theorem have been made.